All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD 1000 Web Development Technologies class, I've been creating a series of videos based on the Mozilla Developer Network's Learning Web Development series. I have done the getting started with the web and the HTML structuring the web, so I'm in the learning to style HTML with CSS, and I'm on the CSS building blocks section, which is module 2 of 4. And we are up in there to the CSS selectors part. So as it says, in CSS, selectors are used to target the HTML elements we want to style. There's a lot of different selectors available, and it says it allows for fine-grained precision. In other words, you can be as granular as you want to or need to be. All right. In this article and its sub-articles, we'll run through the different types in detail, showing how they work. So I'm going to look at some of these. I'm not going to put in every single example as I have been doing because it's going to take too long. All right. And I mean, I want to get on. I was hoping that by the end of the day today I could finish these. But then if I do these two tomorrow, I mean, notice what I have yet. I'm going to go through all of these. I'm going to go through all of these and all of these. And all of these are here. I'm going to go over React. I'm not going to touch on Ember or Vue or Svelte or Angular, but I will go through Git and GitHub, and I will go through cross-browser testing, and we will go through the first steps here, and we'll talk about Express. I'm not going to go over Django. And with these questions, we'll take a look at that and see if there's anything that seems to be worthwhile. Okay. All right, so with that said, let's just jump back up to the top. It says we have already met selectors, so we've already talked about them. The selector is the first part of the CSS rule. As mentioned there, it's a pattern of elements in other terms, which you can use to do whatever it is you want to do. The element or the elements that are selected by the selector are referred to as the subject of the selector. So H1 there is the subject of the selector. Now, they mention here, it says in earlier articles you met some different selectors and learned how you can target them in different ways. So this is about as simple as it gets when the selector itself is just a type of element. In CSS, selectors are defined in the CSS selector specification. All right, the majority, and they show where you can go, and there's a link to it if you want to take a look there. So if you have more than one thing that uses the same CSS, the selectors can be combined into a selector list. So in other words, right there, notice that whether it's an H1 or whether it's the class special, in both cases, we're making the font color blue. So you can just say H1, comma, dot special or dot special, comma, H1, and then put the color blue in there. So either way would work just fine. You can put them on one line, you can put them on multiple lines. That doesn't matter either. So they've got an example here. I'm not sure exactly what this is supposed to be showing. Okay, you'll notice that we've got a span where the background color is yellow, so it looks like we're setting up that span there. Strong, where the color is Rebecca purple, that looks like it's there. And an emphasis with a Rebecca purple, so it looks like it's right there. All right, well, you'll notice these two are the same. So in other words, when we are setting these up, this could have been set up right here as, instead of setting it up as two selectors, which is totally fine to do, this could have said strong, comma, EM or EM, comma, strong, because in both cases we're doing the same thing. When you group selectors in this way, if any selector is invalid, the whole rule will be ignored. So in other words, it's saying right here, that's a valid selector. This is an invalid selector. But if you combine them and you put 2 periods in there, which makes it invalid, the whole thing becomes invalid. So it's an all or nothing type of proposition, in other words. All right. As mentioned there are a few different groupings of selectors that you can use. Now, some of these we've already looked at. Again, all H1s. Anything within a class of box. Anything within an ID of unique. Now, they have not done a good job in this book or in this presentation so far of talking about IDs. 2 basic differences between IDs and classes. Number 1, to actually show the class in your CSS, you preface the name of the class with a dot or period. Whereas with an ID, you preface the name of the ID with a hashtag or a pound sign, whatever you want to call that. It's the first thing. Second thing, IDs are set up, they're defined so that there's only one of them by that name. You can have multiple IDs, but each ID should only be referenced once in the HTML on the page, whereas classes can be referenced as many times as need be. All right. There are also attribute selectors. So this would be the title of an anchor tag. Or as it says, even make a selection based on the presence of an attribute. So this is only an anchor tag that goes to that particular site. Now the pseudo elements we've talked about in here already a little bit. Pseudo really means false, all right? And when you start to use pseudo elements, in fact, let's see if we can bring this up, because there is an order when you are working with hyperlinks. All right. The recommended order is link, visited, focus, hover, and active. It says the link and visited should come first. Next should be the focus and hover, because if you don't do that, you can overwrite the actual order. That's why it says here, does the order of my pseudo classes matter? Yes, it does. So here is the recommended order. Link first, then if you're going to use it, visited, then focus, then hover. All right, so that's the recommended order. I'm not saying that's the order they have here. That's the recommended order. This isn't the only useful order, nor is it the only one right order. There's different ways that it can be done. So here is an article that's referenced. Boy, couldn't ask for much more than this. And I'm going to link it right here. So there you go. If you go out to sitepoint.com, SitePoint writes they have a lot of different books that are really pretty nice. But sitepoint.com/pseudo classes, pseudo-classes-the-basics. All right. And it's an excerpt from a book, but I think that would be a great place to get you started. Now, there are things in here that are first and last that you can use. Notice what it says. For example, : first line always selects the first line of text inside of an element. In this case, the first line of text inside of a paragraph. All right, combinators. And these combinators, we've started looking at these, but didn't look at them in much depth or breadth of coverage. It says this example will select all paragraphs that are direct children of articles. So in other words, they're paragraphs right underneath the article itself, not maybe an unordered list that has a paragraph in it or something else with a paragraph in it, but all the paragraphs directly under the article tag itself. All right, now, very important here. It says you can look at the reference table for the selectors below, all right, and find out more by going out to here. And this is going to give you, I mean, a lot of this I think is what we just looked at, but the universal selector I already showed you earlier. And usually if you're going to use a universal selector, you put it at the top of your program, and it's basically the equivalent of a CSS reset, where you'll reset your margin and you'll reset your padding, etc. to 0, so you'll remove all of it. There you go. So now there's no margin. As it says, using the universal selector to make your selectors easier to read. Well, one thing about this is if you use the universal selector, and let's say we had both padding and margin here, that means that everything is going to be pushed over into the upper left corner. We already talked about that before. All right, but the advantage, so to speak, of doing that is now you could, it should look like that on every browser. So that should remove any default padding or margin that gets put in by the browser, and that may be different within different kinds of browsers. All right. Here's more on class selectors. We've started talking about those already, but again, many of the examples there are more examples, but they're the same ones we've looked at. So there's the ID. An ID can be used only once per page. All right. You can have multiple IDs on a page, but each one of those IDs should only be referenced once in the HTML per page. Okay. All right. And I'm going to jump back into where I just was, right here. And notice there's a reference table of selectors. And again, this is hyperlinked up the wazoo. So if you want more than you've just been given, you can go back and take a look in there. All right. So next, since we just finished selectors, next we're going to go into the box model, which is very important. All right, and I don't know if they've got a picture in here. Yeah, well, they do, but I don't like it. So I'm going to come in here and grab a different picture. And I'm going to use the one from W3 Schools. Okay, not the best one, but it works. All right, so I'll come back with that lecture momentarily.